The escalation of the war in Korea. Why did peace talks take so long? Please feel free to pause the film where prompted in order to complete the tasks and consolidate your notes. Armistice was signed on the 27th of July 1953. Yet, however, by the end of June 1951, the Soviet Union had made it clear that it was prepared to negotiate a military armistice and that territorial and political issues would not be considered at the talks. In other words, that peace would be desirable by the Soviets. The Chinese had already incurred 85,000 casualties and 17,000 of their number had been taken prisoner, suffering a massive shortage of ammunition and food, which led to the demotivation of the Chinese volunteer army. It was already clear that the United Nations forces in Korea, although not able to win the war, could not be decisively beaten. Please pause. What happened then at the initial peace talks in 1951? Why did these talks break down? The initial talks in 1951 then took place in July at Kaesong. Chinese forces seized the area and controlled movement into and out of the negotiation area. The first problem was the establishment of a demilitarized zone in order to facilitate peaceful and cooperative talks. The United States wanted the current front line to be the line of separation between the two forces. The Communists wanted it to be at the original 38th parallel. Talks broke down with both sides claiming violation of the conference area and negotiations ended. Please pause. The fighting continues. An air war was being fought at this time to disrupt supplies to the Communists moving south through Korea. The attacks weren't only on aircraft but airfields, rail tracks, bridges, trains and the general infrastructure of both North and South Korea that were occupied by the Communist forces. The Communist North Koreans responded by using planes from the Soviet Union. What resulted was the US victory in the air and their achievement of air supremacy over the Korean peninsula, despite initially incurring high losses. Bombing with air supremacy was now expanded into the north. On the 29th of August 1952, a strike on Pyongyang, military targets in the North Korean capital, killed 6,000 civilians, and the United Nations US forces used napalm in this particular attack. A consequence of this was international outrage. Please pause. What were the key issues raised at the peace talks at Panmunjom? Both sides had a fundamental distrust of each other, not just North and South Korea. Both sides used opportunity to rebuild and modernize their fighting forces during this time of temporary peace. Both sides used this opportunity of peace also to strengthen their defensive positions along the existing ceasefire line. Prisoners of war. According to the Geneva Convention, prisoners of war shall be released and repatriated without delay after the cessation, the ending of hostilities. The US did not want to return troops as it felt it would provide the Communists with an extra pool of manpower. Additionally, there would be no forced repatriation to North Korea of North Korean prisoners of war. In April 1952, there were 132,000 North Korean prisoners of war, but only half wished to return to the North. Many of the North Korean soldiers that had been captured were actually South Koreans forced to fight when the South was first occupied by North Korean forces at the initial outbreak of the war. Additionally, of the 21,000 Chinese prisoners of war, 16,000 did not wish to return to North Korea and then back home to Communist China. Please pause. Pressure from Syngman Rhee. There was pressure from the South Koreans to escalate the conflict. To save the situation, we must do all we can to defeat and destroy Chinese invaders. Authorize General MacArthur to use any weapons, even the atomic bomb. A few bombs on Moscow alone will shake the communist world. This was written in a letter from Syngman Rhee to President Truman. Syngman Rhee obviously is still hanging on to his desires to bring together the whole peninsula of Korea under his rule. Still seeing this in a more civil war context, but now more recklessly prepared to spread that war to a direct attack on Moscow. Please pause. So what was the key change then that took place between 1952 and 1953 that would eventually result in a ceasefire being arranged? Well, 1952 is an election year in the United States, and the Republicans win the US elections. Dwight D. Eisenhower becomes American president, and he takes office at the beginning of 1953. This administration change will oversee changes in foreign policy. Please pause. President Eisenhower. He was perceived to be more aggressive. He was prepared to escalate conflict in order to end it more quickly. Prepared to use whatever weapons were available to bring about a ceasefire. However, there were alternative proposals. An organisation, a commission, the Natural Nations Repatriation Commission, to temporarily supervise the prisoners of war. There'd be a period of 90 days where the North could send representatives in order to convince the POWs to return home. And the fate of those unwilling would then be subsequently decided at a conference between the two warring sides. Please pause. An armistice was signed on the 16th of June 1953. However, even despite this late stage of proceedings, Rhee opposed this armistice. Alternatives for the end of the war. There were Chinese domestic issues. In 1953, the first 5-year plan was announced. It was very clear that in order to industrialize China and consolidate the revolution there, Mao would need money to be redirected from its military spending onto more economic and social projects. Secondly, the North Korean economy. This was at breaking point. National income was down by 1/3, people's livelihoods had been shattered, and the infrastructure had been wrecked by US and UN airstrikes. Additionally, Stalin died in 1953. Malenkov, one of the key players to emerge after Stalin's death, suggested and made public the notion of peaceful coexistence with the United States. This would subsequently lead to a negotiated settlement on several outstanding issues, not just between North and South Korea, but wider issues in the Cold War. Please pause.